First, let's take a look at the basics. Now I've got here 3 polka dot stencils, really useful little stencils. You'll see they're in different sizes. We're going to use different sizes throughout this demo. And I've got a cupcake here that we've just done some polka dot stencil dots on. But how did we achieve that result? So let's take a look. We'll pop a blank one in. I've got some colour in my airbrush here, and we're just going to do this with our small dot stencil. Now I'm placing this on the top of a cake, and it's really important to mention that we're on the top of a cake because we're not yet dealing with the side of our cake, and the angle will change depending on where you're using your stencil. I'm just going to turn this on, use my kitchen paper to check my colour. I'm happy that's a pink. And we're going to do how it should look to begin with. I'm holding my stencil down. I'm ensuring I've got great contact all the way around, and I'm going to very gently build the colour. Do you see how my arm is moving very slowly in a little circle? I always say it's like round the garden, like a teddy bear. That's what I want you to do to build this colour up on the stencil. When you then lift, you will have a great clean line and a full colour stencil. Most people, however, like to try and build that colour too quickly, and what happens is this: they leave their airbrush still and they build and they build. Now they've got their colour. Ew. Can you see the mess that we've made? We've not got a clean line at all. And if you take a look at the underside of your stencil, can you see here that it's all saturated and wet? And it's because the airbrush colour has bled beneath it. Now the angle that I was spraying at is really important too. When it was the top of a cake, we are going straight down. What we don't want to do is take it at an angle, and it will blow air underneath our stencil and take colour with it. So to get that great, crisp, clean line, you must be pointing straight at your project, straight at your stencil, which in this case is down. But let's say that we don't want to go with a full colour. We can actually look at some really cool effects with stenciling too, and they're much easier than you'd think. I'm just going to pop this one to one side, and we'll work on something a little larger so that you can see it. So we've gone for our medium dot here. I'm going to place that down on the cupcake the same. Now we're going to look at just shading with our stencil. Now when you want to create great effects with airbrushing, people make the mistake of actually airbrushing the cake. What you need to do is use this stencil to airbrush. Your then lovely overspray and shading will do the rest for you. And I'm going to take this shading what I call the clock. If you imagine a clock, there's 12 o'clock all the way round to 8 o'clock. So let's go this way. Here I am starting at 12, and what I'm doing is concentrating on this stencil here, and my overspray will just touch my project. Round at 12, do you see how much colour is actually going on the stencil? And off at 8. So there's all this colour on the stencil, but there's just a small amount of shading in the centre. And when I bring that off, you can see how we've actually started to shade something. This is really great. We're going to be putting some bubbles on shortly, but think about eyes on a project, or really bringing something to life and making a sphere look 3D. Really great, useful tool on that one. Now let's take another one. I'm going to do a little effect here. So I'm going to place my stencil down again. If I hold that in place there. What I'm going to do this time is just take it straight across the top and straight across the bottom. And what I love about this is that the airbrush will just leave the overspray. It'll leave the highlight of that shape behind without having to fully colour anything in. So you see on this cupcake, we've done the top and we've done the bottom, leaving the overspray to fill the centre, and that can really start to look like a cool effect. So do you remember in the previous lesson, we'd put this great airbrushed gradient down our two-tiered cake? We're now going to start turning that into something a little more special. It may look plain at the moment, but stenciling is the next task for this guy. I'm going to turn this round and we're going to put some bubbles on our cake. And to do that, I want to be level with it. So I'm going to bob down and kneel so that I can see it eye to eye. So here's the front of the cake. And remember, we only did half because we're going to be adding some other details to that later. I'm going to be working with white. So I filled my airbrush with that. I'm going to check that I've got white. Look, there's a little bit of blue first, but there's my white. And we're going to make sure that we position our stencil so that we've got full contact. Can you see my thumb is pressing that down there? I'm going to be wanting to point at it, and I'm just going to be doing my clock. So from 12 round. Can you see how it gently builds? It looks quite white, and then when it dries, it will fade. And if I lift that, you can see that there. We've got more of a highlight here in this corner than then up here. I'm just going to do another one of those. Always make sure your stencil is dry before you pop that back down. So same principle again. What I love about these ethanol-based colours is that I can move straight on and go over it. I don't have to worry about the stencil drying because these colours go on dry. Do you see how I'm going backwards and forwards though? So I'll go from 12 o'clock round to 8 o'clock, but then 8 o'clock back to 12 o'clock. I'm just building that and not moving it or not keeping it still. And I'll just do one more. Do you see this stencil here? Look, it's really good to point out. Do you see how I've managed to catch it? Just there. Actually, we can really fill that in. What you've got to be dead careful with, when you go with putting a stencil back on, that you've got it in exactly the right place that you want it. With a circle, it's pretty easy. With something more delicate, you need to be really careful. I'm just going to build that colour up so that that little nick that was in there isn't as obvious. And when the cake's finished, nobody's really going to notice, but I'm trying to help you learn how to correct your mistakes. And there it is. That's much better. I'm happy with that. And then the next one, we'll just put one down here. Actually, we'll go with up here. That's the great thing about deciding where these things go. And again, 12 round to 8, 8 to 12. Just keep thinking of that clock and build that colour. And then lift. Now, if you were using water-based colours, you'd have to be really careful because they are so wet. This gets saturated really, really quickly and the colour will drop down from there. Now, whilst I'm down here, let's take a look at another effect that we're going to do. And we're going to put some shafts of light down the front here. Okay, so I've got a piece of paper here and I'm just going to fold that in half. What I want is this edge, just here. I've given it a really sharp crease. And the reason I've not used one on its own is because paper will saturate really easily. So by taking it into a double fold, you've given yourself a little bit more to work with. So I'm going to place this paper. Again, I want to make sure that I've got contact with the cake. Now this stencil is going to move. It's a really sort of fluid stencil. And what we're going to do is create a shaft of light, and our overspray will make it look like the light. We're going to use white again. I'm going to use this as my little checking colour point. Now I'm happy with that. And I'm going to follow the paper up and down until I'm satisfied that the colour's built. Again, the fact that this is ethanol based means that a different lighter colour will show onto a darker colour. You couldn't do this with anything but ethanol based. So you're just building that colour up. When I lift that, there's my second line. So when you're doing this, you can layer this. You go from left to right, different angles. You're building up those shafts of light. And it's actually worth just taking a minute to step back and look. See where you need the next line. The same with the bubble stencils too. Make sure you take a good step back and take a look at your work.